US and China tensions at the heart of this meeting. While the US says that it is repeatedly seeking to speak to China, it is also doing things which may anger China. Right now, for instance, PACOM, the Indo-Pacific Command, is making a transit in Taiwan. How are you reading? What kind of messaging do you think the US is sending?
Well, I think obviously we want to see more dialogue, and dialogue matters, which is why the Shangri-La dialogue, I think, is so important and been so enduring over the course of its history. But I would say that the common waters, international airspace, are there for everyone. And the United States is operating in accordance with its rights within those waters. And it's important that those be maintained as open waters because it's important that the global rules-based order be maintained in this region. And certainly from an Australian perspective, when we think about where our interest lies in the rules of the road, and that means freedom of navigation, it means freedom of overflight, and it means that in a place like the South China Sea, for example, where most of our trade transits. So I don't think there's any other message than the need for the rules to be applied to every country.
We heard from Prime Minister Albanese urging countries in the region to avoid getting caught between the US and China. I mean, until recently, one would be forgiven for thinking that Australia is firmly on the side of the US strategically. Is Australia trying to get to the middle in terms of US-China relations?
Well, we have an alliance with the United States, which has been in place since the end of the Second World War, and formally since the 1950s. It's central to our national security and it's central to our worldview, and we're very committed to the alliance, and none of that changes. We are obviously a country of the region, and our largest trading partner is China. We value a productive relationship with China, and we seek to deal in our relationship with China on its own terms. And I think it's complex, that relationship, because there are security anxieties that we have in respect of China. We are seeing a very significant build-up of its military, and that's happening without a sense of strategic reassurance to us, but to the region and the world about its purpose. And so, we've got our issues. That said, we do have a significant economic relationship with China, and we want to manage that as well. And I think it is, ultimately, this is actually the reason why dialogue matters. How you navigate those two things is complex, it's not obvious, it requires discussion, and that's why we want to have it.
But the question is whether or not Australia can be seen as a neutral party when defense ministers before you have said that it is inconceivable that Australia will not defend Taiwan should China attack it.
Well, first, I suppose in terms of Taiwan, our position is that we don't want to see any change to the status quo across the Taiwan Straits. That is our very firm position, and that's in the context of having a long-standing one China policy, which has been the bipartisan policy in Australian politics going right back to the mid-1970s. So that's where we stand in relation to Taiwan and that issue. But I come back, we can be an ally of the United States, and we can build a productive relationship with China. We firmly believe that that is possible, and that's the line that we seek to pursue.
I want to touch on Ukraine. Critics are saying that Australia is contributing only a small fraction to military and humanitarian aid in the country, despite the fact that it is among the biggest beneficiaries, given the surge in oil prices as well as commodities. Why that small role?
Well, I certainly wouldn't accept that. I mean, we're the second largest non-NATO contributor to the support of Ukraine, and that's behind Sweden. And that's been consistent since Russia invaded Ukraine. We would be the largest military contributor of support to Ukraine in the Indo-Pacific, putting aside America, of course. And so I think it's understood across Europe. I think it's understood by Ukraine itself that Australia is very much punching above its weight in its support for Ukraine. And the reason we are doing that, notwithstanding that Ukraine's a long way from Australia, is that what we see at issue there is the very sanctity of the global rules-based order. I mean, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not an exercise of resolving a dispute by reference to international law. This was simply trying to impose the rule of power and might by a large country over a smaller neighbour. That cannot be allowed to stand in 2023. I mean, if that's the world that we live in, that is a very bad portent for all of us, which is why we see it as being so important that Ukraine is able to resolve this conflict on its own terms, and therefore why we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
What would it take for Australia to do more in Ukraine, especially considering the fact that, you know, when MH14 was shot down by Russia, Australia lost dozens of lives.
Sure, and that is why we're the second largest non-NATO contributor to the support of Ukraine, and that's behind Sweden, which obviously is about to join NATO. We're a long way from Ukraine, and yet that's where we stand. Largest supporter in this region of military support to Ukraine. So we're very proud of being that. So that support is significant, and it's seen as significant by Ukraine, and I might say the countries of Europe. And the reason we are doing this is for everything I've just described. The global rules-based order matters, and whilst those fighting in the Ukraine armed forces, first and foremost fighting for their own country, there is a sense in which they're on the front line there for all of us who believe in a rules-based order.